spend most of my time in this building as a DU law spouse. My wife is a DU law alum, and she did a lot of mock trials, so I spent a lot of weekends in the various rooms on this floor following mock trial. She's the real lawyer in the family. So I think I'll just give you a little quick background on me and my work, and then a little bit about where I think we find ourselves in the country at this moment and why I think this race matters. And then I'd love to jump into, I know you all have specific policy questions on all sorts of topics, and so I'm not going to try to intuit what you might ask. I'll just let us jump into those and leave plenty of time for Q&A. So as some of you may know, so I started my career as a teacher. I'm a fourth-generation teacher, so I started my first job was in the Mississippi Delta. I taught high school English in one of the poorest counties in America there. Then came back to Colorado and was a high school principal. Ran a school in a juvenile detention center down here. I ran a school that served kids in treatment centers around the state, and then I ran a high school up in Thornton for 4 or 5 years. And then that was when I started to get more and more interested in policy, and went to work on the Obama team when he first ran for office. But originally got into politics because I was the principal of a high school. And we were successful in taking this high school that had struggled for a long time and making it the first public high school in Colorado where 100% of our seniors were all admitted to four-year colleges. But the downside of that was we discovered a great number of those kids who were Mexican and Guatemalan immigrants were undocumented. And so we had a lot of students who would come to me and say, I'm admitted to college, I have this acceptance letter, but there's nothing I can do with it because to pay $35,000 out-of-state tuition at CU with no financial aid is not sustainable. And so I originally ran for the Senate on the commitment to my kids we would work to try to pass the asset bill, which was a piece of legislation to make it possible for, we call it, sometimes people call it the DREAM Act, to make it possible for undocumented students to get in-state tuition. After one failed attempt, which was the 13th consecutive year we had passed the bill, we built a coalition the following year to pass it. For the first time got bipartisan support to support it. And so that was a very, very profound moment for us. I think I give you that example because I think this is a moment in time where it's easy to believe that kind of big things are not possible anymore in American politics, and they're certainly not possible in bipartisan ways. And I think there's one kind of picture that captures for me where I think we are right now as a country, and then I'll tell you what I think we're going to try to do to address that problem, because for me this is less about winning a campaign than it is about what does it take to solve the problem that's in front of us. And the picture I think of is an old one. It's one you've probably seen before. But if you remember your old high school history class, and you remember the story of the Little Rock Nine, who are the 9 African American students who integrate Central High School in Arkansas. And there's a photo of Elizabeth Eckford, who's one of the students that's entering the school on her first day. And she's walking out carrying her books. And there's a little white girl behind her named Hazel Bryan. Kind of a poodle skirt. Looks like she's on the way to a sock hop somewhere. But she is up in Elizabeth Eckford's face, just screaming at the top of her lungs, and there is just this visage of such deep hatred from this little 14-year-old white girl. I think America looked at that photo and said, wow, how did we get to this moment? And I think there are ways in which the last year of American public life has felt like that photograph, which is sort of America at its worst. And for me, I think there are 3 reasons why you find yourself in that place. It was true then, I think it's true now. One is that you get moments of intense economic or cultural change that a society feels like is happening faster than they can keep up. And when those changes come, if you add on to that a loss of people's faith that public institutions or government will be some part of solving that problem, then you have a great amount of fear, very little hope that someone's going to do something to do anything about it, and then what people do is they turn on themselves and you begin to just fight it out between each other over those scarce resources. That was where I think Elizabeth Eckford and Hazel Bryan found themselves. That's where I think we find ourselves right now. And so our approach is, what does it take to solve those 3 problems? How do you rebuild those relationships that have been torn? How do you rebuild some faith in government to solve big public problems? And how do you solve the economic fear that is at the heart of that anxiety? So I'll tell you the 3 things we're laying out to do, which is why we're so excited to be here today. The first is we're going to start by what do you do to actually rebuild those relationships in ways that are broken. And I think this is a time where there is, in some places, not a lot of appetite for politics, in some places a very deep desire to get engaged in politics. And so we're starting by quite literally trying to bring Coloradans back together to reopen the conversation about what the things are that we share in common. So we've started a couple of things. One is this Saturday, we're launching our first Service Day, which is an opportunity to bring Coloradans together from all backgrounds to say this is not a political event, this is not phone banking, this is not door knocking, this is taking on a task that a community thinks is important. We're rebuilding a school playground in Jefferson County. It gives people a chance to kind of work shoulder to shoulder again on things that they care about. That allows you to rebuild some of the relationships that are strained. We're doing in each of the small towns as we travel the state what we call family dinners, which are when we get to Alamoso or when you get to La Junta or when you get to Durango, we're putting 15 people at a dinner table together, and not, as you would normally do in a Democratic primary, 15 Democratic activists. It's 5 or 6 Republicans, 5 or 6 independents, 5 or 6 Democrats, with the belief that you generate a conversation there that allows you to kind of rediscover part of what's been lost. So that's a little bit about what we're doing to try to say, what are the ways in which we give people the space to get into conversations again that allow them to rebuild what's been broken. And then the second is, what are we going to do to try to rebuild people's belief that they can be a part of the solution? And so what we're starting is building local leadership teams around the issues that are most important to people in each county, and yes, in each campus. So one of the things we want to talk to you about today is we're going to, on each campus in the state, build our own autonomous campaign team here that will run policy, will run communications, will run outreach, will run canvassing, will run organizing, and will develop what the issues are that they think are most important, and then join the conversation with our other regional teams around the state that are doing this and our statewide team. So there's one integrated apparatus that doesn't just operate on the how that you win an election, but actually the what it is that makes up the coalition that governs. And so our idea is to kind of dramatically restore to people local leadership over the issues that they care about, so you have an apparatus for people to have that kind of leadership. Then the third is, what do you do to try to address that fundamental economic anxiety? And I'll close with this, which is, I think that what you're seeing now is people's insecurity that comes from what happens when the economy takes off faster than we know how to catch it. And so, not dissimilar from what I think Hazel Bryan thought she saw at Little Rock. But the question is, how do you prepare people for a world in which the jobs that you wanted to have when you were 10 may not exist when you enter the workforce at 30? Or if you've been in the industry for 20 or 30 years, it suddenly goes under, what are the new skills that you find? So we proposed what we've called the College Opportunity Promise, which is the opportunity for folks to get access to skills training or to career development or to community college up to 2 years debt-free in exchange for them providing some meaningful service to the state. So we've provided as a service for skills development program that allows folks, if you are a coal miner in Routt County who's going to see your coal plant closed because we're going to move to more renewables, which I supported and voted for, and because coal is more expensive than natural gas, we need to figure out what the plan is to figure out how we get you from the job you had to the job that's emerging. What are the skills that you have now? What are the skills that you would need? And how do we get you access to the training to get you from one step to the next? And I think that what you find is if you do that effectively, you give people some certainty that it's not the change itself you have to fight, but the change is going to be part of the routine, and what you have now is a method to move from where you are to where you want to be. And the hopeful close to this story is, if you take those three things on, I think history tells us it's actually quite possible to come out of this conflict stronger than you entered it. So the end of the Elizabeth Eckford and Hazel Bryan story, if you don't know it, is Hazel Bryan leaves Arkansas, leaves Little Rock High School, moves to Southern Arkansas, gets a job, gets married, has some kids, discovers that this cultural change that she thought was going to destroy her way of life is actually not going to do that. And about 10 years later, she sips through the white pages and finds Elizabeth Eckford's phone number and calls her and says, hey, I just want to call you and apologize for who I was then. And I want to know if you'd be willing to sit down and have a cup of coffee. And Elizabeth Eckford says, yeah, I'll do that. They sit down, they have a cup of coffee. They go out on a second date, have a second cup of coffee, third, fourth, they actually develop a friendship. And they say, like, we have a chance to do something to actually change the way people view this question. We ought to write a book together. They do. They write a book. They go out on the circuit and travel to high schools around the country, and with that photo in the background say, this is who we were then, but this is who we are now, and this is how we got from there to here. And I think there is no doubt we're all going to have to answer for who we have been as a country over the last year. The question is, what will we do now so that 10 years from now we have the chance to tell our kids a very different story about who we have become and what we've done to get there. And I think that question is one of what does it take to at least find one state that can prove that this model still works by being able to bind folks back together, help them rebuild their faith that collectively we can solve big problems, and helping us find that if you do that, you actually build a place where anxiety doesn't rule the day, but actually aspiration and hope rules the day. And that feels possible, and it feels possible here. So that's why I got in this race. That's why I'm here today. That's why I'm delighted that you had me. So I will close there, and thank you so much for having me, and love to jump into questions. The floor is open. I suppose I can cold call, if not.
I brought one. It's got a picture to go with it.
Excellent.
That's
Visuals.
Oakland Park Elementary School in what was your Senate district. And all those little red triangles are foreclosed upon homes over a 10-year period. So I have some preamble to it, but in the interest of time, I'll just go to the question is, why was such a devastating impact of foreclosures on the community you represented? Didn't you, or did you, sponsor legislation such as the Mortgage Accountability Act that Representative McCann brought forward that was killed by Representative Williams in that district? What would you do? So why didn't you, or did you participate in any legislation like that? And as governor, how would you address what Judge Martinez in the federal court said is the state with possibly the lowest bar for foreclosing on homeowners in the country?
Great question. I did support and sponsor a number of pieces of legislation around the mortgage foreclosure crisis. Some around everything from around what the process for foreclosure was, how people got access to services and supports, how you extended the timelines for that foreclosure. I'll tell you one concrete one that I think made a difference that people don't pay a lot of attention to. One of the problems that we had in foreclosures was that when people lost their property, when people lost their homes, if there were liens on those homes, what you could do is essentially make a trading market for those liens. So let me give you an example for liens here. If you were in GVR and your HOA, if you didn't pay your HOA fees for the last 2 months of your, when you weren't paying your mortgage, you probably weren't paying your HOA fees either, the $15 a month. What you could do is the HOAs, or if you had a fence that you built that you hadn't paid for, what those people could do is they could create a resale market, essentially a stock market, where they could sell those liens. And what would happen is when you lost your home and your home goes to auction, and say, it was $250,000 and it sells at auction for $100,000, so now you're $150 underwater. Mm-hmm. What would happen is those people with the liens had the right of first refusal to swoop in and buy any house at auction after it was auctioned off. So what it would mean is there was a whole groups of lawyers who would arbitrage these liens and sell them, and the result was they drove down dramatically the auction prices of these houses. Because no one would buy it for $100K if you knew the next day someone could swoop in and buy it out from under you. Mm-hmm. And so what we did was change that practice to say you couldn't allow these sort of arbitraging traders to trade these liens on the homes. They had to either take the money up front, which what that allowed homeowners to do was to recover far more of the amount on their lost property when it got sold. So instead of it now selling for $100K, it sells for $200K, which means you're underwater $50K, but you're not underwater $150K. So that was one that I sponsored that didn't get a lot of press, but I think it made a big impact on folks in our neighborhood that were getting foreclosed on not losing a huge amount of their principal when their houses got sold.
Do you think these folks were members of an HOA that were saved from that, sitting around Oakland Elementary School?
I don't know. I don't know the.
I'm just getting